Okay, so thank you everyone for taking the time to come to this training. This is a repeat of the training that we had last week. So you'll see at the front it says August 3rd. I just left that there so that if you did happen to come last week, it would be great for you to see it again, but it will be the exact same presentation. Also, just to let you know, this is going to be recorded and then put online. So it should be online by later this afternoon. If you have any additional questions or you forgot one of the steps, you could always go back through this, which I think is great. So I just want to do a quick roll call, just so that I kind of know who's on the phone and each of you know who's on the phone. If you don't hear your name at the end, please let me know that you are on. So we have Andrew, we have Brian, we have Christine, we have Edna, we have Jeff, we have Joy, we have Julie, we have Kristen, Steve, Liz, Mary Oil, and Maureen. Is there anyone who's on the call who I haven't mentioned?
Michelle, this is Heather and Amy from Arbor.
Great. Hi, Heather and Amy. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome.
No. I'm still trying. This is Leslie Seagard from St. Catharines.
Hi, Leslie. Are you able to see it?
I just see a message from the organizer. I don't see your screen.
Okay, so if you can't see it, if you can get out of it, go back into the invite and make sure you're clicking on today's link, not the link from last week. That could be the issue.
This is Trisha from New Choices. I'm having the same problem.
Yep, you probably clicked the wrong link. So if you could click out and then go back in and make sure you're clicking for today.
Where?
In the invite.
The 726 email?
It should be on your calendar.
I got a 727 email.
Okay.
I clicked the one on my calendar, and that's the problem I had, but I'm clicking on the invite now.
Okay, great. And I think the one on the calendar, you just have to scroll down. Great. Trisha's on. Great.
This is Christine. I'm in. Is it supposed to be doing anything other than just showing the first page?
Nope, that's it right now. Some people were just having an issue just even logging on. They weren't able to see that. Great. So now you should start seeing the next page. So the goal of the webinar today, and I'm going to try to make it concise and kind of quick, but there's a lot to cover this year. So it's to provide information for renewal and COC project applicants, and I'm stressing it's renewal. If you are applying for a new project, we will be working with agencies one-on-one. The renewal process is different, the application is different than the new project application. So the webinar is going to detail changes within the application and updates that are within eSnaps too. So we're going to go step by step at the end, and I have some screenshots. We're going to talk about the application format review and go over the 8 parts of the application quickly. And then we're going to do a detailed eSnaps submission direction tutorial, which we try to do every year just so that folks remember. And again, there are some changes this year. The webinar is not going to go over a continuum of care. It's not going to talk about the full NOFA, and it's not going to go over any full detailed priorities or objectives that HUD has for this year. So I think most important, again, because you're completing a renewal application, this should be a welcome back. So this first page of eSnaps should look really familiar to everyone. FYI, eSNAPS is now only going to be for your applications. Your APRs are no longer submitted within eSNAPS. That is submitted within Sage. So I also point that out because it's more important than ever to remember your username and your password. Because you're not going to be going in there on a regular basis, even less than you were before. If you do forget your password, that one's not as hard because you could put in a request to the eSNAPS help desk to reset it, and that's relatively painless. But if you forget your username, that's a problem. So just if you could remember to keep it nice and handy, that's great. The other note is that CARE staff doesn't, even though we work within eSNAPS, we don't administrate it in any way, unlike our HMIS. So if you forget your username or your password or have any very specific technical issues going on with eSNAPS, you have to go through the eSNAPS help desk, not through CARES, unfortunately. So I mentioned that there were a lot of changes this year within the application and some changes within eSNAPS. And I think some of them are great. It's going to make life a lot easier going forward. The first, which I'm really excited about, is all of those HUD forms, the 2880s, the lobbying forms, the drug-free workplace, all of those HUD forms are now electronic and are within eSNAPS. This is great because you are less likely to make mistakes on it. Common mistakes that were made on it were dating of the forms. You have to have them dated, and they have to be dated within a specific time period. So now that they're within eSNAPS, it's automatically dated, and we know that it's going to be correct for HUD. The other thing is folks were forgetting to have their executive director sign it. Now, because it's within eSNAPS, it's a certification. So you click on a button and it's an automatic electronic signature. So that's really helpful. The second big change is that you don't need your full grant number anymore. That was becoming really confusing, and there were also a lot of mistakes that were being made because technically your grant number changes every year, the last 4 digits. And so HUD now is making it easier, and they're calling it a PIN number. So your PIN number is the first 6 characters of your grant, and that is that part of your grant that never changes anyway. So now you don't need your full grant, you only need the first 6 digits. HUD has created a new project designation. This is for permanent supportive housing only. It's called Dedicated Plus, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You can now submit your application without changes. There are some caveats to that, and we'll talk about it. You could also create expansion projects within eSNAPS. This, again, is not for a renewal, though. This is only for new projects, but it's something that renewal projects should know about. So if you have a project, a permanent supportive housing project, for example, that has 10 beds, and there is bonus funding available, which this year there is, and you would like to just add on to your current project, in the past, you weren't able to do that. What you had to do was apply for 2 separate programs, create 2 APRs, fill out 2 ELOCs information and voucher sheets. Going forward, HUD is going to do all that on the back end. So if you wanted to add 5 more beds to your 10-bed program, all you need to do is have your PIN number, so the first 6 digits or first 6 characters of your current grant, and when you fill out your new project application, you pop that in there. And so on the back end, HUD, if you are awarded, will just combine that funding into your current renewal project. So that's exciting because it makes life a lot easier going forward. There's some budget information changes, which I think are great because this was another issue that folks were having. In the budget area, in the past, you used to have to detail your descriptions and the quantities. So if you had support service for $25,000, you needed to have a short narrative next to it that exactly explained how you were breaking down FTE for that support service. What HUD is saying now is if you are a renewal project, it is their expectation that you're doing the same thing over and over and keeping it going. So you don't have to fill that out for a renewal application because they're assuming it's the same as what you had last year. If there are any changes, your project would do that with your regional HUD folks. You don't need to worry about that during application time. So that's going to stop a lot of contracts from having to complete C19s or complete any technical deficiencies. So that's another good one. There has been some updates to the match policy. It's good news for folks. We kept going back and forth with HUD about whether program income could be counted, and we're going to define program income. And it can be. HUD made that really clear in the NOFA. And there is a new question that's been added, and we'll go over it. The new question specifically focuses on if you're using your project income, and if you are, you need to estimate it. The other match policy that was updated was if you are claiming in-kind match. Even in the past, you really were supposed to attach your MOUs, your in-kind MOUs. Now they are requiring that you attach your in-kind MOUs. And they're pretty clear about what that MOU should look like. So we'll go through that too.
Hey, Michelle, can we ask questions?
Yeah, please.
I just have one quick question. Because we've been butting heads a great deal with the MOUs from VA, do we continue in the way we've been doing it?
So what's great is that if it is a cash match, it's not as strict. So for the VA stuff,
this was an in-kind.
So
they weren't giving us a price, and we battled with them for years over this issue.
Right. I would say continue doing what you were doing because you don't have much of a choice when it comes to the VA.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure.
No, that's a good question. And again, that issue we had brought up both to the regional office and we brought it to DC. And they didn't give you a C19 on that. They didn't say it was a technical deficiency. So my gut is telling me that they're not going to start that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
This is Perry. Just one quick question along those lines. What if, like in our case, our agency is providing the in-kind. I can't have an MOU with myself. Is there a procedure for that?
So it's interesting because they did not detail that. So, right, because what they really were focusing on was third-party in-kind match.
Okay.
So I could put in an AAQ and see if they respond, which they may not during competition. I would say continue writing the letter if it's yourself, because when they come to monitor you, they'll look at your own books. But it really was service providers that they couldn't then double check, is what I think they were stressing to have that MOU with, if that makes sense. So if you're saying that you have support services from another agency, it's hard for them to come in and verify that through your books.
Yep.
So I think that's more what they were concerned about than something that you were saying you were doing yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. So I wanted to go over, and I'm going to go over this relatively quickly because it's a lot. So if you look at the screen, in the NOFA on page 18 is where they talk about dedicated plus projects. It's really important if your agency is thinking about dedicating the whole project that not only you look through this and hear this, what I'm going to say, but look through this list that I'm giving you, but also look through the NOFA and read that page, because it's a designation that, again, is for a whole project. And I'm stressing that because I think we're so used to hearing dedicated chronic beds, and now HUD is shifting their language to 100% dedicated, which means dedicated chronic, and then they're talking about this dedicated plus. So dedicated plus is kind of, I want to say, a step down from being a 100% dedicated chronic program. It's kind of serving folks who are either almost chronic or who would have lost their chronicity because they were in another program in the past. So what HUD is trying to do is not only focus, again, golden, what they want fully is that first bullet, which is dedicating to those who are chronic, right? So a 100% dedicated program, for example, if you had 10 beds, you would 100% dedicate all of those beds to chronic, right? The step down from that is this dedicated plus project. So a dedicated plus project has ORs in between any of these bullets. So it's opening up your ability to serve folks, but again, the focus is on those who are most vulnerable and who have been homeless the longest. So one of those could be, you could take somebody who's chronic, of course. The next has to do with, HUD has been focused on shifting transitional housing projects within the past few years. So they are focusing on those who were in a transitional housing project that's going to be eliminated. However, they also had to have met the chronically homeless definition at the time they went into that transitional program, right? That's the second bullet. The third, you could also accept somebody who was residing in a new, which we're going to get into it, joint type of project. It's called joint TH-PH-RRH component. But again, someone who is residing in there, but who was homeless, chronically homeless, prior to entering into that project. The next one I think is great, and I know a lot of folks are serving populations who meet that fourth bullet, which is residing or has resided in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven, or emergency shelter for at least 12 months in the last 3 years, but they don't meet the chronic definition because they haven't done it on 4 separate occasions. So that person could be put into a dedicated plus bed and they're eligible. And then the last just focuses on ensuring that we're also working with the VA and any of their projects. But again, if they're in a VA project, they have to meet one of the criteria from above at intake. So your renewal application is going to ask you to designate your beds and designate your program, kind of 2 separate things. So all projects are going to be asked if they want their project to be 100% dedicated or dedicated plus. So there are kind of 2 projects, right, currently now being funded. One is that first bullet, which is if your project is currently not required to be 100% dedicated, so if you're not one of those bonus projects, right, your choice is NA, dedicated plus, or 100%. So you can be dedicated plus, this is the confusing piece. You could be dedicated plus, but then dedicate all your beds to chronic. So if you are 100% dedicated, you can say, yes, I am going to be able to serve all of those folks who were noted on the previous slide. However, I am going to dedicate that my beds really go to that first bullet, which is chronic. So it's almost like icing on the cake. And I'm sorry, my screen is saying that I don't want to restart. Okay. The other type of project are the projects that are currently 100% dedicated, and the choices are dedicated plus or 100% dedicated. Again, depending on where your project is where you would get those choices that are dropped down. But your project can still be dedicated specifically for beds, right? So I'm going to go through that. I know it sounds a little confusing. Before I do, though, it'll make more sense when you see the screen. I want to go back and talk about that joint TH-PH-RRH program. So that joint program is something that HUD talked about during registration time but didn't get into it, right? They gave us a heads up that they were looking at kind of mushing together the budget lines in transitional housing, as well as allowing transitional housing programs to also use that rapid rehousing component, so that rental component. So really, its intent is to ensure that we're able to have this crisis housing, so kind of like that transitional housing, but also within the same program, have that financial assistance and wraparound services to quickly get folks stably housed using rapid rehousing services. So the caveat here, and I'm specifically talking to folks who currently are transitional housing, is that if this sounds good to you when you look through some of these bullets, right, where you're able to have a housing first philosophy, you're able to connect your clients who are currently in your transitional housing to apartments and to get them rental assistance, and you want to do that and you want to be able to just within one program do that, you can't just turn your transitional housing program into a joint project. What you would have to do is reallocate. You could reallocate, create a new joint project, and then you'll be able to have the rental assistance along with the operations piece. The other really exciting thing is HUD is allowing this joint TH-PH-RRH new projects to apply via reallocation or through bonus. But the caveat here is that you have to be housing first when you apply through the bonus. More on this is detailed within the NOFA on page 20, and HUD did put out, it's a really good 4-page description of why they created this joint project and which communities they think it would work best in. So before we continue, are there any questions?
Michelle, this is Kristen.
Yep.
Back to the dedicated plus and the 100% dedicated. So in Albany, where we have coordinated entry and where if our projects are participating, we're already prioritizing households that are chronically homeless, it feels like most of our projects are there for, I know not technically dedicated to serving chronically homeless households, but just by nature of the way the system works, we're taking the most vulnerable person. And so if there is someone who's chronically homeless, then that person goes into one of our beds. So I'm trying to figure out how, if we're not currently dedicated and we want to become dedicated, it doesn't feel like anything would really be that different, because if there are no chronically homeless households on the list, we would move on to the next person and we would get that documentation from the coordinator. So I kind of feel like we've already gone in this direction as a community.
Yep. Yeah, so I totally hear what you're saying, Kristen, and I think this just goes to show, one, how great Albany and the surrounding COCs we work with are, because I think the philosophy of housing the most vulnerable first has been taken by the whole community, right? So I think you're right in the fact that we're doing it already. In a lot of communities, they're not. So this may be very shocking to other COCs nationwide. But the difference here does have to go back to what you said about getting that letter from your CE coordinator, right? So now you would be required to get that letter and make sure that it's within your file. So if you weren't dedicated before, and this goes for either being 100% dedicated or dedicated plus, right? Either way you go, you would have to make sure that your CE lead is ready and prepared to have a letter saying, one, there's no chronic on the list. So if you are 100% dedicated and dedicated plus, which means that you technically tell HUD you're dedicated plus, and then on screen 4B, you say that all of those beds are dedicated to chronic, your CE lead would need to write a letter saying, currently, as of today, there is no chronic on our list. In addition, as of today, there is no client who meets any of these criteria. Because it's possible to have someone who doesn't meet either the chronic or any of the dedicated plus. And you're just taking the most vulnerable after that, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. So I think my question is, if as a community, if it helps to have more projects dedicated 100% or dedicated plus, then I think my question is, if we're already sort of doing that, then why wouldn't projects select one of these two?
I agree with you, Kristen.
The nature of the system is pushing us in. I mean, if we're participating in the system, we're already doing it. So I think that's my question is almost why wouldn't we at this point? Because we're already doing it, and it's going to benefit our overall application, I imagine.
Absolutely. Yes.
Kristen, this is Perry. I agree with you. I was really looking at this, trying to see the downside, if you would. All of my beds are chronic. I didn't really see one. I only saw this actually as helping, so I'm going to dedicate all 25 of our beds as dedicated dedicated plus. But thanks for bringing that up. That helps me reconfirm my decision.
Okay, yeah, me too. Thanks, Barry.
But again, I think it's because you hit it, Kristen. You're already in a community that's doing that, right? So you're already going where HUD is now really pushing hard for folks to go. In other communities nationwide, they're not on that path yet. So this would be hard for them because they wouldn't understand how they would, one, work with their CE lead, or how they would be able to serve the most vulnerable if they're not already doing that, right? So it makes me feel good to hear you question, like, well, this doesn't make sense to me because we're doing it already. Like that feels good to hear that, because I think HUD, this is where HUD has been going for a long time. And I think it was confusing to people starting with coordinated entry when they started to say, well, take the next vulnerable person on your list. And even if you're chronic, you could take someone who's not chronic. That confused people too, right? Like, oh, so I have a dedicated chronic bed, but I could take someone who's not. Well, yeah, you can, because the point is to make sure that your system is being utilized fully, right? So I think I'm glad to hear that. And I think you're reading it right. It is, what you're saying is right. There's really no downside to it, except, again, the only caveat is if you didn't have a CE lead who is able to give you that letter, right? If you don't have that, then it's a problem, because when you come and get monitored by HUD, they're going to ask to see, if you're dedicated plus, they're going to ask to see that paperwork if the folks in your program don't meet one of these criteria. So does that make sense?
It does. Thank
Okay.
you so much for talking that through.
No problem. Are there any other questions? Because this is a big deal. And Kristen, you're right. Having the chronic beds, dedicated plus or 100% chronic, HUD is looking at them equally this year in your application. And so they are worth a lot of points. So if your community could get beds, like continue to increase the number of those dedicated plus or 100% dedicated programs, the higher your score is going to be.
That was my question. Roughly, do we know how many points that is?
It looks like it's about 10.
Okay.
It's not an exact count because HUD kind of gives us a range, and they try to match up the question to where their like grade system is, but it looks like about 10, which is a lot on a 200-point application when you think about it.
Thank you.
No problem. Are there any questions on the joint TH-PH program? Okay. So the application breakdown, the application doesn't physically, outside of the beginning of the application, which is part 1 with the HUD forms, outside of that, it doesn't look very different, right? You have the 8 parts like you've always had. Part 1 and 2 have to do with the HUD forms, and then certification for your agency, really. Parts 3 and 6 are project specific. So if you have a transitional housing program, it's going to be a little bit different than if you have a permanent supportive housing program. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to go over permanent supportive, but really what we talk about could go through any program, including SSO. There was an addition in parts 3 to 6. It's submission without change. So if you have an application that you didn't have any technical deficiencies with, so that you didn't receive a C19, and you really don't want to make any changes, the number of units stayed the same, the demographics is going to stay the same, your budget line is going to stay the same, which it really has to. You have the ability, you have to review it, but it's in read-only mode. And then you're able to just hit a button and submit without changes. So you don't have to add anything. You don't have to, massage any numbers. It literally is carrying over from last year, and it makes it so much easier. Part 7 is the attachments and the certification. And then part 8 is your submission summary, which just ensures that you have everything complete. So we just talked about you could submit parts 2 to 6 without any changes. If changes do need to be made, because for some folks they do, and I'll give you a warning on one area that may. When you go to the submit without changes area, you tell eSNAPS, yes, I want to submit with changes. It then drops down all of the screens, and you check off which screen you need to change. You then have to put in a little narrative form, and HUD is really asking just for bullets, what you changed within that screen. The reason for this is because if you submit your application without changes, it goes through a very baseline review at HUD, which is a great thing for you. If you submit with changes, but you detail exactly what changes you made very clearly, like, oh, I had to make a change because my APR was submitted late this year. All you have to do is note that. HUD only reviews that one page. Again, it makes it quicker for them. It's easier for you. Just be very clear what you specifically changed on that page and just note it so that HUD could get through that review process quickly. In addition, before it goes to HUD, when you submit, it comes to CARES first. And CARES staff reviews your full application. So if you submit without changes It also makes the review on our end much quicker, and we'll be able to get edits back to you, if any edits are needed, much quicker than we did last year. So, which means, in the long run, the application process for you and your staff shortens up also, because there's not as much back and forth with us. So parts 3 to 6, there were some new screens or additions to some of the screens, which we kind of already talked about. So there's a new question on screen 3C that talks about dedicated plus, and then there's the new match question. And I'm going to show you where that is because I took some screenshots of it. Parts 4, 5, and 6 stayed the same. So let's go through the demo. I think this is where folks are really going to have questions, and feel free to stop me as I'm going. So in eSnaps, there are 4 pieces to submitting your application, right? The first thing you have to do is update your applicant profile. So your applicant profile actually looks a little different now. You don't have as much there to do because you don't have to upload all of those forms anymore. They moved the majority of those forms to your part 1 of each application. However, all of the information pre-populates. So your applicant profile, it's really important to go into it and make sure all of the information is correct. Also, your 2880, so that's the page that tells HUD how much you're applying for. And we used to have to do one per project. Now you do a base one within your applicant profile, and then it continues down within all of your applications. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So first you update your applicant profile. Then you register for the funding opportunity, which is relatively quick, and you only do that once. You then create the project. So if you have more than one project, you create the multiple projects in one step. And I'm going to go through how to do that. When you create the project, this is also the step where you import the information from last year. If you have a project that is consolidating, and we had a lot of consolidations, please do not import information from last year because it is going to confuse HUD. If you have that consolidation, please touch base with me offline because it's important to make sure that you're starting with a clean renewal application and not importing data. The fourth part is actually completing the application and then submitting it. So this is the login screen. Again, your username and password. If you forget them or it's wrong, remember eSnaps does lock you out. So if you have the correct username but you put in the password wrong 3 times, it locks you out for about 15 minutes and then you could try again. If when you try again, it's still not working, go to the help desk, which is this forgot your password, and put in a request. It comes relatively quickly. Rules of behavior is still there. That started last year. And your applicant profile. So this is your front desk, your front office portal, and if you have more than one applicant, like when I log in, I see more than one, you're going to have the black little arrow, and it's going to allow me to choose multiple. If you don't, if it's only one agency, this is the only choice you're going to have. So it's only going to pop up with your agency, so you don't need to worry. Once you click applicants, you're going to want to open your applicant profile, which is this little orange folder, yellow, orange. And it will take you directly into your profile. So the issue with the profile, you could constantly go in and out of this anytime throughout the year to make changes. So right now it looks like the form is locked. It's complete. In order to open it, you need to go to the submission summary, which is page 6. You're going to click the edit button, and then it's going to turn into a gray complete button. That means that it's open. So notice when I went in the first time under the Housing Authority this year, my 2880 has a red X next to it. So you're not able to close your applicant profile unless everything is submitted. So if this stays grayed out, you're not able to do the next few steps, which is register for the funding opportunity or create a project. So if you get error messages as you're trying to register or as you're trying to create your project, 99% of the time it's because you accidentally left your applicant profile open, and you have to come back and make sure that it's closed, that it's complete. So once you open it for editing, you should go back to the page 1, to the very beginning of the profile, and make sure all of that information is correct, because everything here carries over to your application. And so if it's wrong here, it's wrong on your application. So this year, your 2880 is electronic. It's not a piece of paper. And the beginning of the form starts in your applicant profile. So again, even parts of your applicant profile are pulled from earlier parts. So this form really takes information from the legal name and entity and all that information that was filled out a couple of pages before in the contact information. So if any of this looks wrong, you have to go back to the other pages and fix it, because some of these are in read-only mode and some of them you can edit. So if you're clicking into some of these boxes and it's not doing anything, just go back to earlier pages, and what you fix there will fix here. It will automatically update. So once you complete the form, and it's not a lot of information that you're completing, you do have to certify it, which is just that little checkbox. This red X will go away, and each of your project applications will then pull information from this base 2880 for you to review and complete within the project application. So this is so much simpler than it was last year, where we had to fill out, 20 forms if you had 20 projects and get your executive director to sign all of them. This way you complete part of it here, and then it automatically transfers into your project application, and it just makes life so much easier. So once you complete that, so you would hit that complete button, you come back out onto the front office space, and you're going to look at your left-hand side, and then you're going to register for the funding opportunity. So this is the screen, and you'll notice that they also have FY 2016 renewal application and new application information there. So just be careful that you're registering for the FY 2017 renewal. Now, if you're also thinking about doing a new project application, this is where you would hit and register for it also. So this area you only do once, even if you have multiple projects. When you hit it, you okay it, and then it tells you you've been registered. Real simple. It tells you you have to go back because there's nothing else to do. The next step, though, because it's going to take you back to this screen, the next step is to create your projects. So you're going to go to the left-hand side and click on Projects. And if you have used eSnaps in the past and you have multiple projects, when you first click on the screen, you're going to see a whole bunch of information like you see here, right? So the Albany Housing Authority has a whole bunch of old projects that were created. and old APRs. So all of that is just noise. You don't really care about that. What you need to do is specifically look for renewal project applications for FY 2017. So you're going to go to funding opportunity name, and you're going to click on the little black arrow, and it's usually at the bottom. I don't know why for different people. Sometimes it's at the top, sometimes it's in the middle. Just again, make sure that you're picking FY 2017. When you click that, you're going to see nothing. It's going to say this list contains no items. That's because you haven't created your projects yet. So in order to create the project, you want to go to this little plus sign here and click on that. So we use the example of the Albany Damien Center program. And what you're seeing here is the creation of the 2017 application with data being imported from last year. So the applicant project name, you have to type in. Again, my suggestion, as it's been for the past few years, always put the fiscal year that you're applying for it in parentheses, because eSnaps doesn't delete anything and it'll take you forever if you just keep calling it Albany Damien Center program. If you keep doing that, you'll have a million of them within your eSnaps and you're not going to know which is from what fiscal year until you go into it. So when you import the...
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Now, because we have several programs, it seems like there's, when we do this step, it carries over into both programs, even though one's a transitional housing and one is a permanent housing. How do I correct that?
I'm not quite sure of your question, that it carries over. Are you talking about the importing?
Yes. It goes, it shows like we're a 9-bed transitional housing. It goes into our permanent housing, and it seems okay when I look at the actual application, but when I do the APR at the end of the year, they actually have, for the permanent housing, a lot of the data for my transitional housing on it.
Yeah, so I think that was part of the confusion within eSnaps, connecting the application to the APR. And that's not going to happen anymore because of Sage.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to double check because it's very confusing, and you know, we're a very small outfit, so I won't pick up on it until we actually do the APR.
Yep.
Which is a year after.
Yeah, and I think...
If we correct it, then that will be good then.
Yeah, so that's the nice thing about no longer having APRs within eSnaps is, because you're not the only one that happened to, Jeff, where it was like eSnaps didn't know when it was pulling the APR, which one it was pulling if you had multiple programs. I don't know why. But in Sage, that issue is no longer an issue.
Okay.
So...
It looks bad on our part because when we do the rank and review, half of that data isn't even the data that should be imported into that program.
Right.
Okay. So if it's going to be corrected, then that's fine.
Yep. So the only thing I do have to say, though, Jeff, is to just make sure, though, in your application that you have the correct grant number, which now that there's a grant PIN, it's going to be easier, because that could have been the issue, that one year the grant numbers were switched by accident on the application, and it screwed things up going forward. So if you notice here, when you import the data, eSnaps will give you last year's grant number to ensure that the name of the program is actually the grant information that you want imported to this year's. So just double check that.
Okay, and I just got one quick question. If we're going in there and we have all these multiple different programs, there's a lot of them that in the earlier years we made a lot of mistakes, so we did like maybe 3 or 4 different applications for it. Is there any way that we can clean up that inside the system?
No.
No,
Unfortunately, eSnaps, there is no deleting within eSnaps, which is, again, part of an issue that HUD is working on. So there are a lot of like messed up applications or test applications that are just floating there that can confuse you. However, with the with the import data, what they made cleaner starting 2 years ago is that it will only pull from information that you had from last year. So it is, they now have made it so that it's less likely that you make a mistake when you import.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That helps me.
So if you're here and you want to import and you have another program, so say you have 4 programs that your agency is applying for renewals, you could click Save and Add Another and just do this process multiple times. If this is the only program you have, Save and Back is what you need to do. Again, if you have a project that you just consolidated, what you would want to do here is put the applicant project name, so name your project, but do not import any data from last year. You are allowed to create a fresh project, renewal project application. If you do that, you obviously cannot submit without changes because your whole project, your whole renewal project is a change, which is fine, and HUD expects that for a large group of projects that have consolidated during the grant inventory worksheet period. Okay, so once you created your project, you then need to actually look through it and submit it. So that process is done under the Submissions tab. So again, it's your left-hand side. And notice all of these are in the order that you have to do them, right? So you have to complete your applicant profile, you then have to register, you then have to create your project, then you go into submissions where you would submit. Once you are in the submissions, there's no need to go back into your funding opportunity or your projects, but you may want to go back into your applicant profile if you notice that something within your application is incorrect. Like maybe your agency's phone number changed and you didn't notice that you needed to make that change when you were doing your applicant profile, but as you're in your project, you note that. You can't change it in your project application. You have to go back to your applicant profile and change it there, and then it will automatically carry over to your project application. So once I click submissions, I then have to choose which program, right? So you go to applicant project name and you find that 2017 project that you created. In this example, it's the Albany County Department of Mental Health. So I chose them, and then I go into the little orange folder, and that's my application. So we receive a lot of calls about when you first open your application, it looks really small, right? When you look at your left-hand side, all you see is part 1, right? That's because you have to certify, you have to go through part 1 first in order to open up the rest of your application. So this, it looks a lot like last year's with a couple of caveats, right? So you're filling out all your information and double checking your, instead of grant number, now it's your PIN, and you're clicking here that you did ensure that your PIN number is correct. You go through just a couple of basic pages which have not changed, and then you have to make that declaration that everything that you're certifying all that information. Once you do that, I know this is small, but all of the information, all of the other parts then open up. Now, the very next page after the declaration is the 2880 for your specific project here, right? So you'll notice that a lot of it is grayed out, and I'm sorry that it's small, but that's the only way we could fit the majority of it on the page, on the screen. And that's because, remember, you just filled this information out back in your applicant profile. So if anything here is wrong, you have to go back to your applicant profile, open it up for editing, and change it. So the 2880 has two parts, right? Part one asks, it's the threshold determination. So they're asking you, are you applying for assistance for a specific project or activity? Yes, everybody is. So that question HUD automatically answered and you can't change it. The next one, have you received or do you expect to receive assistance within the jurisdiction of the department involving the project or activity in the application in excess of $200,000 during the fiscal year? For further information, they tell you to go and look at a specific reg. Now, when they say in this application, they don't just mean this one renewal application. They mean within the COC full application. So for the Housing Authority, an example, this grant is only $65,000, right? So if it was only talking about this grant, the answer would have been no. However, what they're asking is for the full COC application, and the Housing Authority in Albany gets like 1.5 million. So the answer here is yes, right? So for your agencies, please just double check that. The next part asks about if there's any other government assistance provided or requested and the use of the funds. So this one, I don't want to go through in detail. It's for your agency to both double check part 1 and parts 2 and 3. So I put it on the screen, and again, these slides are available so you don't have to quick read it now. Just make sure that you're answering part 2 correctly and that then you understand what an interested party is for part 3. Because for the majority of agencies, the answer is there is no interested party. So, but it's your agency's responsibility to know that. And CARES really can't double check it. So we just make sure that it makes sense, but we wouldn't know your specific agency's information. Are there any questions on the 2880 before I move on? Okay. So the other forms, again, that you used to have to sign and then scan and put up are now within each specific application. So your drug-free workplace, the 570, that's in there. Your lobbying form, so there's a new lobbying form. It's pretty quick. So you have to read those top statements and then certify that it's true. And then this was the lobbying form that we've always filled out, the SFLLL. And again, now all you have to do is certify it. You don't need your executive director to sign anything, and they don't need to scan anything. Okay. So right away, once you finish those forms, HUD gives you this little note letting you know that the next few screens are going to be read-only, right? And that you are able to complete your application and submit without changes, or if you need to make changes, you can submit with changes, right? The caveat here is this too. If you make a mistake, and I'm going to go to that, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump for a second. If you make a mistake on this submission with changes screen, it's going to stay open. So for example, and HUD kind of warns you about that in that little note, but not clearly. If you say that you want to submit and make a change, this is the screen that pops up. if you realized, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to do that, you could quickly just click this and do the submissions without changes, and you're all good. But if you click this and then you click one of these parts that you want open, you can't go back after you save it and change that. So if you accidentally made a mistake, all you have to do is note in that little box that you really submitted without making any changes and that it was an error. And we'll go through that in a minute. Okay. So the other caveat for those of you who are renewing, and this is the first time you're renewing, you're not going to be able to use this, obviously, because you don't have anything from a renewal application that you imported. This also goes to those who are not importing information due to consolidation. So even though you're going to see this screen, you're going to be able to edit going further. So you don't worry. So we talked about Dedicated Plus before, and this is the new screen that automatically has to be filled out from everyone. So again, just to make it clear, in screen 3C, they're not asking about your beds. They're asking about your full program. So they're asking if your project is going to be 100% dedicated or Dedicated Plus. These are the options that you have, right? So 100% dedicated, Dedicated Plus, and then in this case, the NA. If I choose to be Dedicated Plus, I still have to come here to Area 4B and dedicate my beds to chronic if I choose to have dedicated chronic beds. So again, they're two separate things. If I want to dedicate plus, and then I also want to have some dedicated chronic beds, I can do that. If I 100% dedicate my beds to chronic, then 4B should look like this, which is I have 6 beds and all of my beds are dedicated. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Are there any questions? Okay. The match question, and this is automatically open. So as you're going through, this is one of the only screens that is not in read-only, just like the Dedicated Plus. It asks if your project generates program income as described within the reg. So program income. I know that this is something that folks have been asking if we can use as a match for a long time. And it was really confusing because folks weren't sure what counted as program income. And we want to define it for you straight from the reg. So program income can be rent and occupancy charges. So that means that if your project has rent and or occupancy charges, you can estimate that, which is if your program does have program income, you would say yes. And then you need to describe that source, so say occupancy charges, and then it's going to ask you to estimate the amount of program income that you want to use as match for the project. As match. So again, this is something that I think a lot of agencies moved away from in the past because it wasn't clear. One year HUD said you can use it, the next year they said you couldn't, then they went back and forth on it. Now they're being really clear and they want you to estimate for them what's going to be used as match.
So, Michelle, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So now we can use the rent as part of the match?
So it's the charges collected from program participants.
Okay.
So you can't use the full rent, right?
I see what you mean.
And again, really read,
That can be used,
yes.
which before couldn't be, right?
So they kept going back and forth. The last that we heard was no.
Okay, right, as of last year.
Right.
Okay, so now they say we can use a portion of that, just not all of it.
Right, because they're pretty clear about that it has to be collected from program participants, right? So
What do they mean by collected as opposed to saying this is what the rent is?
right, so you can't, if none of that goes through your agency, if you're collecting $0 from your clients to pay the rent,
Okay,
then it's $0 is your program income. If you're collecting 30% of the client's income, then it's the 30% you can use, not the full rent.
okay, so, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping real quickly. So if we're soliciting and we do all these fundraisers, we can use that portion towards the rent as opposed to actual the clients or residents?
So you're saying you do fundraising and you pay your client's portion?
Right, these fundraisers are to pay their portion. Can we use the full amount from that?
Well, that's something separate, right? That would just be fundraising, period.
Okay.
You can't double dip though, right? Like you can't say, I raise these funds, and then these are the funds that are paying the program participants' portion, and I'm gonna like use both of them together, because one of them doesn't really exist. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Okay.
I certainly do. Do they give you criteria of the portion that the residents are paying that we can actually use?
So no, it's whatever comes in on your books. So I think that if you have a specific concern, that's something I would speak to Lambros about, so your HUD rep, because your HUD rep would be able to explain to you what paperwork you would need when a monitor comes to look.
Well, what you were saying earlier is as long as we don't, charge more than 30%, if I'm understanding it correctly, then if we charge, say, 20%, then we could use that full amount.
So again, HUD is pretty open when you read this definition of what they say program income is. They keep it as rent and occupancy charges. So again, it depends how your program is structured and what fees you are collecting from program participants.
But we could easily change that then, since if we ask for a rent, let's say, and it's less than 30%, then we can easily change that to, the other definition that you were just saying.
Which is why I would talk to Lambros on what the regs say you're allowed to do and what percentages, especially if you're using it for match. So those type of questions, I would definitely go through him to get verification.
Because we were told that we couldn't.
Right.
Especially last year.
Right.
So this is something new, so I just want to make a clarification. So I'll call Lambro.
Yeah. And this is brand new. This was in the NOFA. So it is brand new. And your Buffalo rep should be clear on this new reg. So they'll definitely be able to help you. And, Jeff, you're bringing it up, but I think a lot of other folks on the phone may want to look into this, right, to make sure if you're struggling to meet your match. But I do suggest, because this is new, HUD is being clearer about what you need to keep documentation-wise. But again, they don't put that in the NOFA. They share that with their regional offices because those are the folks who monitor you. So I would say if you have any questions, go to your rep with this. specific.
It definitely lessens the burden on the program if we can use portions of the rent as, on cash match.
Correct.
Okay.
Michelle, this is Tricia from New Choices. This had come up during our HUD audit. We were discussing this, and so just like you were, it depends on the structure of your program. If the lease is, so for our program, the lease is in the tenant's name and subsidized, so the tenants pay the landlords directly. So like you said, it does not come through our books, so we can't count that. However, when landlords submit security deposits that we paid back to our agency, it does come through our books, and therefore it's considered income.
Right. So I think it's important, and thank you for bringing that up, Tricia, because I think a lot of agencies were struggling with how to put it through their books, right? Like they didn't, it wasn't clear what that meant. But I have to say that especially the HUD, the Buffalo HUD regional office is really good at walking agencies through that. What they'll do is look at what you're currently doing and make suggestions. So please talk to them because they're really good.
Hey, Michelle, this is Brian. Can I just ask one follow-up to that?
Sure.
So it sounds like the distinction is between permanent supportive housing as a leasing arrangement versus a rental assistance arrangement, right? In other words, if there's private landlords involved that the tenants are paying directly, that isn't considered rent or fees collected because it's not being paid directly to the grantee?
So I don't think that's necessarily the case. Again, some leasing agencies, some programs that do leasing collect the money from the client and then pay the landlord. So if they're collecting the money, then it's through their books. Some rental folks do the same, some don't. So I think this is kind of like leftover from the old supported housing program days in how programs are set up. So it's logical what you're saying, but not every program was set up or runs that way.
Okay, so but on the flip side of that, if the tenant is paying the landlord directly, we would have never considered that project income. So wouldn't that be just flat cash commitments? The tenant is contributing to the operation of the program?
So that's an interesting question. So I think that was the dilemma that folks were going under because they weren't understanding what program income meant.
Well, and we were told that we couldn't consider those tenant contributions as match in previous years because it was project income, and it never really made sense because it never came to us in the first place.
Right.
So it's now that the option is there, it sounds like it's because it's not going to us, it's still not considered match. It's almost like we should have been doing it all along now.
Yeah, this has been an ongoing debate. I wish I had a better answer for you, Brian.
Okay. Well, then okay, so I guess I'll follow up with HUD, but let's just assume that we can consider the tenant portion as match. When we complete this section of the application, should we limit the projected match to just account for 25% of the total budget, or if we project all of our match in cash and in kind as well as tenant contributions and it far exceeds 25%, is HUD going to be expecting us to document match to the projected amount even if it's in excess of 25%?
Well, the question here really just says estimate the amount of program income that will be used as match. So if it's the 25% and that meets your full 25% of your project, well then, okay. But if it doesn't, right, whatever you say you're using as match, HUD expects you to then come back and report to them on it. So even if you don't make it with all of them, it still has to equal 25%, even if it's skewed, if you have multiple match types.
Okay, so if our tenant contributions exceed 25%, we shouldn't really project any in-kind match commitments at the time of application, because then we're going to be held to that.
Correct. You're going to be held to at least being tracking them, right? Because you're technically not held to the exact amount that you estimate. Because again, this is an estimate, right? But they expect you to track it.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, this could change things for you, Brian, but please talk to Caitlin and get a very clear understanding of program income in your project's case.
Yeah, well, it would enable sort of a structural change too, I think.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you for your help, Michelle.
No problem. And I wish I had more. You know, they keep clarifying this, but I feel like they give a lot more clarity to the HUD office. So I'm sorry to keep pushing it off, but they're the experts on this because every program and project is so different.
I understand. Thanks.
No problem. Are there any other questions?
This is Perry. Just really quickly on the A-defined program income directly by grant-supported activity, are we saying in that, for example, if you receive a grant from, I don't know, the AIDS Institute to provide a service, that is program income?
So, that's interesting. So it depends. So that
we all have grants from other places that come in for programs, so I'm just curious if that's considered program income.
I don't believe it is. That could be a match because that income, is it to specifically support that program?
No, but it's the people that we're serving
Right.
benefited by that program.
Yeah, no, so that's not program income.
That's not program
No,
income. Okay.
no,
Thank you.
no problem.
Michelle, this is Kristen. I just have one more general question about match.
Yeah.
Do you ever recommend that projects project a little more than 25% match because HUD sometimes will increase project budgets based on the FMR, or I know we've seen bumps in our other lines over the years, and then we've had to go back and kind of redo our match. So do you recommend that we shoot a little bit higher if we can?
Yeah, I think, and that's a great point, Kristen. I would say if you could shoot to 30, the only thing is that if you shoot to 30, you then have to make sure that you're tracking that and that at the end of your project that you actually met that 30%. So if you can, there are some programs that could easily do that, right? Because you literally have a matching grant that covers 50%, right? So that's fine, but for those who struggle, I would say keep it at the 25 if you're struggling, and knowing that you may have to readjust once you get your contract.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Did everybody understand that question? Because I think that's a good one. Because in the past, due to FMR changes, some of our projects went up significantly and then were not able to get their contracts until they redid their match. Because their match was now short by $1,000 or $1,500. So again, if you overestimate a little bit, as long as it's not putting your project, as long as it's not too much of a burden, it is a good idea so that you don't have to come back and do all the paperwork. Okay, so the summary budget. This, I just wanted to show everybody, admin, you can have up to 10%, but you can't move your admin from what's on the grant inventory worksheet. So even though they allow you to manipulate this, care staff will call you if you changed your admin because you can't. So just FYI. So we already kind of went through this because I jumped to it, but your submission without changes is actually at the end of looking at all of your all of those screens, right, and your project information. So it asks you, you know, one, are you changing anything because of reallocation, right? So are you dropping your requested amount? Okay, so you put no. Number two is, do you want to submit without making any changes? So they're asking you this because you were just required to go through all of those screens in read-only mode, except for the dedicated plus screen, which is open, and your match screen, which is open. So if you made changes in dedicated plus and in match, but there's no other changes you need to make after reviewing, you are good to go, submit without changes. However, if you noticed that one of the questions within your application needs to be updated, like I was late on my APR, you would need to change that, right? So you would click Make Changes, and then you would find which screen it was. Click on that. So that would be 2B, which is Recipient Performance. You would note in the little screen below exactly what you're changing, right? Had to update the information regarding APR submission. Once you do that, you're able to go to the next page, which is your submission summary. Again, you have to see all of the green complete check marks. If an area is not complete, there'll be that big red X and you won't be able to submit. Once you submit, it does not go directly to HUD. It comes to CARE staff. CARE staff will review it. If there are any edits to be made, we'll reach out to you and we can send it back to you. Luckily, we can send it back and forth multiple times. So we can work with you over the next couple of weeks to make sure your application is perfect. So some important dates, just for everyone to know. The application was available in eSnap starting the 19th, but I know most people didn't get into it until now, right? Because the detailed instructions didn't come out until last week. And so it was important to read through the detailed instructions to understand how to answer things like dedicated plus and your match. So there was no expectation that applications were submitted yet. However, because HUD puts a deadline for your full continuum to publicly announce all of the projects that are going to be within the full application, CARE staff needs every renewal application and new application submitted via eSnaps on or before August 18th. So I know that's next week and it seems like really soon. But again, now that there were some changes regarding the, submit without changes, and now that all that paperwork is electronic, it should be doable. If you're struggling, please contact us immediately so CARE staff could help you through it. After August 18th, CARE staff reviews every single application and every single COC. And again, we will get back to you immediately if we need anything from you. The full application, the full continuum of care, big application, has to be submitted to HUD by September 28th. So know when you submit your application on the 18th, you will be hearing from us very soon if edits need to be made. And we'll give you some deadlines on when those edits need to be made. Just so that everyone kind of has all of the new information, because HUD put out a lot, we have some links here to some important documents. So the NOFA, we have information about that new joint project. Dedicated Plus projects, we have some AAQ information that HUD put up there, how to complete your applicant profile step by step, specific information on how to complete that 2880, which again is your agency's responsibility to make sure all that information is correct. And then we have the project renewal detailed instructions if you get stuck on a question. All of those are within this presentation, which is going to be put online later this afternoon. So you'll be able to go to it and then click on all this. So are there any other questions? I know this was a long webinar, but it was really good. We got some good questions and some good clarifications. Are there any other questions, though?
Well, Michelle, I have to speak first because I'm probably the slowest one out of the group.
Oh,
I just want
Jeff.
to thank you, and I'll definitely be calling you 100 times before we submit. And I just want to say thanks for clarifying a lot of this stuff for us.
Oh, no problem, Jeff. Thank you.
Go ahead, anybody else can speak now. I'm here. I hate to steal the show, but I'm a slow person.
Oh, Jeff. Detailed questions, they're important.
Well, my mother said I was the slowest of all of her children, so I tried to make up for it.
Well, if there...
Oh, that was really helpful.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. I thank you. There really was a lot this year, and I'm sorry if I stumbled over anything. I'm sure that I left something out that folks will have questions on later. Please feel free to contact any CARES planning staff. We've all been working really hard to try to understand the project application and try to understand the NOFA. So hopefully we could help with your questions. All right.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
You too.